My name is Maya Collins, and 4 years ago, my parents gave my sister $80,000 to study in Paris. They told me I didn't deserve a single cent, that I wasn't worth helping, so I walked away. No arguments, no tears, just silence. I built my own life from nothing, line by line of code, paycheck by paycheck. And last month, as my sister drove past my $5 million house in Medina, she called my father crying, "Why does she have that?" But what she never understood is that I have this because they gave me nothing. Have you ever been told you weren't worth investing in only to prove them wrong later? Tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to know I'm not alone. Back then, I used to think every family had a chosen child. In ours, that was always Lila. She was a year older than me, with soft blonde hair, a toothpaste commercial smile, and that effortless charm that made everyone around her feel a little smaller. In high school, she was captain of the cheerleading squad, voted homecoming queen, and even featured in the yearbook under the caption, "The girl who has it all." I was the opposite. I loved the roar of engines, the burnt plastic smell of a 3D printer, and the quiet hum of late-night soldering circuits with the robotics club in a windowless basement room. While my family filled the bleachers cheering for Lila at her dance performances, I sat alone in the corner, writing code, occasionally glancing toward the stands wondering if anyone even noticed I wasn't there. Every family photo told the same story. Lila in the center, glowing like the sun, me pushed to the edge of the frame, half my face sometimes hidden behind someone else's shoulder. Even dinner conversations orbited around her, the cheer competition, her student council speech, or the way her French teacher praised her perfect native accent. As for me, in my worn-out hoodie and messy curls, every time I tried to talk about a software idea, my mother would interrupt with the same weary line. "Can't you ever talk about something normal, Maya?" When I turned 18, my birthday came just 2 weeks after Lila was gifted a refurbished Honda Civic. That day, the whole neighborhood gathered balloons, candles, a cake with her name spelled out in bright pink frosting. I stood on the porch, holding the only gift I received, a green bus pass and my father's sermon disguised as advice. "Responsibility starts with taking care of yourself, Maya." I nodded and forced a smile, but inside, I felt hollow. I knew then that if I wanted to move forward, I'd have to walk no engine, no backup, just my own 2 feet and a stubborn will. When college came around, nothing changed. Lila got into a state college, thanks to extracurricular achievements and my parents' generous financial support. My mother proudly told everyone that her eldest was going to study abroad in Paris, her voice trembling with awe every time she said Sorbonne as if it were heaven itself. I chose a humbler path, community college first, then a transfer to the University of Washington to major in computer science. No farewell party, no new luggage. Just a cold reminder from my mother. If you're choosing to leave, don't expect us to carry your weight. So I worked double shifts, daytime at a cafe, nights at the IT, help desk, living off instant noodles to save enough for a second-hand laptop powerful enough to run my projects. I didn't blame them. Or at least, I tried not to. I kept telling myself that love isn't something evenly divided, that someone has to stand outside the spotlight so that its glow can shine on someone else. But over the years, the feeling of being erased became a kind of habit, like knowing, without looking, that in every family photo I'd be the one pushed to the edge of the frame. On the rare occasions when I actually achieved something, a third-place regional coding award, an internship offer from a small software company, my mother's reaction was always the same. "Good, but you should learn to communicate like Lila. No one likes a girl who talks like a robot." Dend. I still remember the summer after my sophomore year when Lila received her acceptance letter for the study abroad program in Paris. That evening, my family hosted what they called a farewell dinner before Lila flies to Paris. My mother went all out: an ivory tablecloth, scented candles, and a vase of French roses placed perfectly in the center, like fate itself had RSVP'd. I sat near the window, the same one overlooking the backyard in Bellevue where I used to play alone as a child. The air around the table buzzed with laughter, every word orbiting my sister and her new European life. Lila spoke about classes at the Sorbonne, about morning coffees in Le Marais, and my mother added details between sentences, as if she herself were the one boarding the plane. Then my father set his fork down, dabbed his mouth with a napkin, and spoke in that firm, businesslike tone he used when announcing big decisions. "We've finalized the budget, $80,000. That covers tuition, her apartment in Paris, airfare, and living expenses." He paused, looking at Lila with unmistakable pride. "You deserve it, sweetheart. This is the start of your international future." I lifted my head, thinking I'd misheard him. $80,000. The number echoed in my mind like an empty bell, ringing again and again until even the candlelight on the table flickered with its weight. I asked quietly, trying to steady my voice. 80,000? You mean the whole thing? My father nodded, and my mother smiled, self-satisfied. Of course. Studying abroad in Paris isn't cheap. We want her to live comfortably, not worry about anything. Lila's face lit up as she began describing the Les Marais apartment with its balcony overlooking the old streets, and the little cafe she planned to visit every morning. I sat there in silence, listening to the clink of silverware, forcing myself to swallow the dry piece of meat on my plate. Only one thought kept looping in my mind: how could they do this, and not see anything wrong? When they started discussing what furniture Lila should bring, I finally gathered the courage to speak. "I don't want to bother you," I began carefully, "but I'm having a little trouble with the deposit for my dorm this semester. If possible, could you lend me around $2,000? I'll pay it back little by little. Or even just help me buy a few programming textbooks, they're pretty expensive." I didn't even finish the sentence before my mother cut in, her voice cold and sharp, slicing through the air like metal scraping steel. "You don't deserve any help." The room froze. Even Lila looked up, blinking in surprise. I stared at my mother, thinking I must have misheard, but she just took a sip of wine and continued. "You chose that ridiculous computer thing, you chose to live far from home, then deal with it yourself. We don't invest in uncertain choices." I let out a small, bitter laugh. "Ridiculous? I'm studying computer science. It's one of the most in-demand fields right now." My father stepped in, his voice low but laced with irritation. "Lila is building an international future. You only think about yourself. You've never once in your life put this family's interests above your own." I said nothing, but my heartbeat pounded so loud it filled my ears. I thought of the nights I'd worked double shifts at the cafe, the times I had to choose between paying rent and buying a decent meal. If that wasn't putting the family first by taking care of myself so they wouldn't have to, then I didn't know what was. My mother went on, her tone dripping with acid. "You've always wanted to separate yourself from us. You never come to family events, never call, never share anything. Meanwhile, Lila makes us proud. She knows how to live, how to fit in. And you, all you do is complain." The piece of meat in my throat suddenly turned to stone. I set my fork and knife down and said quietly, trying to keep my voice from trembling, "I'm not complaining, I'm just asking for a little fairness." My father chuckled, a dry, hollow sound. "Fairness? Life doesn't work like that. Investments have to bring returns, Maya. We invest in the person who can deliver results. Lila has direction, presence, potential. You? You hide behind lines of code no one understands. You call that a future?" I looked at him, and in that moment, I realized this conversation was no longer about money. It was about worth. They had been valuing me all along, not in dollars, but in image, in what could make the family look good. Lila was their asset. I was the liability they didn't want to carry. Lila whispered, "Come on, Mom, Dad. Maybe Maya's just," but my mother silenced her with a single look. I pushed my chair back, the wooden legs screeching against the floor, sharp enough to slice through the tension in the room. "I understand," I said quietly, my voice sinking lower. "Thank you for being clear." I walked away from the table, leaving behind the smell of wine and expensive perfume. As I reached the door, my mother called out, "Don't be dramatic, Maya. You always love playing the victim. I didn't turn around. Outside, Seattle had started to rain. I sat in my car, hands trembling as I turned the key, but no tears came, only a cold, hollow space expanding in my chest. They hadn't just told me I didn't deserve money, they'd told me I didn't deserve love, recognition, or a place within my own family. I got back to Capitol Hill close to midnight. The rain was still falling. Seattle rain always felt that way, thin, persistent, like the sky was holding on to something it couldn't let go. My studio apartment was small, just enough room for a single bed, a work desk, and a swivel chair with a broken armrest. I took off my coat, turned on the heater, and sat down in front of my half-lit laptop. In the drawer was a wrinkled note from the week before, a to-do list that read, "Submit project draft, call mom." I crossed out the last line with such force the paper tore. After that dinner in Bellevue, I knew that any future call would only make me forget how deeply I'd been hurt. I opened my phone and stared at the contacts. Mom, Dad, Lila, 3 small anchors, each one once a thread that bound me. Sometimes gently, sometimes tight enough to choke. I hesitated for a few seconds, then pressed block contact. No drama, no tears, just a quiet click like closing a door that had been left open too long. Then I logged into Facebook and Instagram, the same platforms they'd used to show off our perfect family, and deleted my accounts. It felt like scraping off old layers of paint from a cracked wall. What remained beneath was cold concrete, but at least it was real. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sound of rain against the window mixed with the distant rhythm of buses passing through the intersection. I lay staring at the ceiling, my mother's words looping in my head. "You don't deserve any help." Each word was like a tiny splinter, not enough to kill, but sharp enough to sting. I got up, pulled out an old sketchbook, and wrote one line. "I don't miss them, I only miss the idea of a family that maybe never existed at all." When I put the pen down, something in me loosened just a little. The days that followed felt strangely normal. I still went to work, still brewed coffee for customers each morning, still fixed printers at the office like nothing had happened. But everything had changed. There was no one left to call after my shift, no text asking, "Are you home yet?" Though even before, those messages had felt more like duty than care. By the weekend, the emptiness in my apartment had taken shape. It sat across from me at dinner. It lay beside me when I woke up. Some mornings, I stared at the ceiling and wondered if I was the one in the wrong, if maybe all it would take was an apology to make everything go back to the way it was. I brought those questions with me when I first met Dr. Tessa Monroe, the therapist my coworker had recommended after noticing how distracted I'd been at work. Her office was on the 5th floor of a red brick building near the University District, its window overlooking Green Lake Park. Dr. Monroe was a black woman in her early 40s, her voice low and warm, like an old jazz record playing on a rainy night. During that first session, she didn't ask what happened. She asked, "How did you feel when it happened?" I sat in silence for a long time before finally answering. "I felt small," I said. Like every time I tried to explain myself, I only proved them right for never listening to me. Dr. Monroe nodded gently. "That's what we call emotional invalidation, the denial of your feelings. You grew up in an environment where love was conditional." I frowned. "What do you mean by that?" She smiled softly. "Conditional love. You were only loved when you met their expectations. When you no longer fit, they withdrew their affection. That isn't your fault, it's how power works inside toxic family systems." Ivan. Over the next few sessions, she helped me put names to things I'd always dismissed as normal. Favoritism disguised as encouragement. Compliments for Lila that always came paired with comparisons to me, promises that appeared only when they wanted compliance. Dr. Monroe called it gaslighting, when people make you question your own perception of reality. I thought about all the times my mother had said, "You're too sensitive," right after saying something that cut deep. And just like Dr. Monroe explained, each time she said it, I believed maybe it really was my fault. One evening, as I told her about being denied that small amount of money for my semester, Dr. Monroe set her pen down and looked at me. "You know," she said, Many parents use money as a language of power. They don't refuse because they don't have it. They refuse because they want you to know who gets to decide your worth. Her words stopped me cold. Instantly, the image of that dinner came back: the candlelight, the clinking of forks, my father's voice saying, "Investments must bring returns." Suddenly, every piece fell into place. By the fifth session, she gave me an assignment. "Write a letter to your parents," she said, "but don't send it. Write everything you've never dared to say." That night, I opened my laptop and stared at a blank page for hours. Then, slowly, the words began to flow. I wrote about the cropped-out photos, the 18th birthday with the bus pass, the way they used the words worthy and unworthy as the unit of measure for love. When I finished, it was past 2 in the morning. I read it all again and realized for the first time in my life the voice in my head was no longer theirs. It was mine. I closed the laptop, turned off the lights, and sat in the darkness for a while. Outside, it was raining again, but this time, the sound was different. It no longer felt like the sky crying, it felt like water washing the dust off the eaves. That's when I understood, this loneliness wasn't punishment. It was space to relearn how to breathe, how to exist without needing permission. And from that moment on, I began to live as if no one was coming to rescue me because, in the end, I was the only one who could. My new job began quietly, without any welcome party or grand orientation. I was a contract software engineer at a small logistics startup in South Lake Union, where glass towers reflected Seattle's dim lights whenever it rained. The company was called RootCore, and we built transport management software for small and mid-sized businesses. There were only 12 of us, mostly young, curious, driven, working in an open office filled with half-empty coffee cups and whiteboards crowded with equations. I found the job through an old friend's recommendation. The salary wasn't great, but it was enough to cover rent and leave a little for savings. What kept me there wasn't the money, it was the freedom to create, something I'd never been allowed growing up. Arjun Patel, our lead engineer, was an Indian guy from New Jersey, brilliant, fast-talking, with a mind that caught every technical flaw like radar. He used to joke that Seattle was a sanctuary for people who love rain and code, and I knew, deep down, that I was living proof of that statement. By day, I worked through my assigned tasks, optimizing APIs, tweaking, routing algorithms, fixing user bugs. But at night, I lived in a world of my own. On my laptop sat a small folder named Wayfinder Labs, a project I'd been nurturing since college. It was an AI module that optimized delivery routes based on carbon emissions, helping small businesses save fuel and reduce environmental impact. The idea had started as a senior year group project, though no one had cared much about it back then. Still, I'd kept the code and quietly improved it over the years. Seattle's autumns were cold and damp, but those months were when I worked best. I often stayed late after everyone had gone home, letting the yellow streetlights spill through the glass windows while the sound of rain drummed softly on the metal roof, a rhythm that felt almost like a heartbeat. My roommate, Zoe, a night shift nurse at Harborview Hospital, would sometimes stop by with a warm meal. "You're such a typical Seattle person," she'd tease, placing the paper bag in front of me. "Living on caffeine, code, and bad weather." I'd shrug and smile. At least the rain slows things down, gives me time to think. We'd eat together right there in the office, surrounded by the smell of old coffee and the hum of computers. She'd tell stories from the hospital, I'd talk about my code. Sometimes we'd both fall silent, staring at the rain-streaked window, feeling like two people stationed at the edge of the world, each fighting a different kind of battle. I didn't realize when Wayfinder stopped being just a side experiment and turned into something I genuinely longed to bring to life. Maybe because it was the only thing I'd ever built entirely on my own, something no one could give me, and no one could take away. One evening, Arjun came back to the office after hours and caught me still coding. He walked over, peering at the screen. "What are you working on, Maya?" I startled a little. "Oh, just a personal project, a small model that predicts fuel-efficient delivery routes." He raised his eyebrows. "Carbon-aware routing, huh? That's interesting. What data are you using?" I explained how my algorithm pulled patterns from weather models, traffic density, and real-world fuel consumption data to generate optimal routes. Arjun sat down beside me, eyes fixed on the code. Do you realize that if you develop this the right way, it could actually become a real product? I laughed, trying to hide my excitement. I'm just a contract dev, Arjun. I don't exactly have the authority to make big moves here. He shook his head. Wrong. In a startup, ideas are the currency. Then he leaned closer, lowering his voice. If you're open to it, I can help you pitch this to the board. We could spin it into an internal R&D branch right here at Root Core Clear Equity. Your code stays yours. I looked at him, unsure what to say. For so long, I'd been used to my ideas being ignored or brushed aside. Hearing someone believe in me made something tighten in my chest. Do you really think they'll say yes? I asked quietly. Arjun smiled. If they're smart, they won't pass up something that could cut operating costs for clients by 30%. We just need a working prototype, some data, and a small case study. I'll handle the rest. From that day on, I officially started living two parallel lives. By day, I worked for Rootcore. By night, I lived inside Wayfinder. I documented every variable, every model iteration, every data run. I borrowed real delivery data from the company with permission, of course, and fed it into deep learning algorithms to predict CO2 emissions per route. Each time the model ran accurately, it felt like reclaiming a small piece of control over my own life. A week before the pitch, Zoe showed up at the office with 2 cups of hot coffee. She set one beside me, rested her hand on my shoulder, and said, "I know you think this is just work, but there's something about the way you talk about it. It's like you're rewriting yourself." I smiled, not denying it. Maybe she was right. Every line of code felt like a response, a quiet rebuttal to the years I'd been told I wasn't deserving. Pitch day arrived. Arjun and I stood in front of a small panel of 3 founders. I presented Wayfinder Labs, an adaptive AI module that learned from real-time data to optimize delivery routes, helping small logistics companies reduce fuel costs and meet Washington's green compliance standards. I spoke clearly, steadily, without shaking, as if my whole life had been building toward this single moment to prove that I didn't need anyone's permission to have value. When I finished, the room fell silent. One of the founders, Marcus, nodded slowly and said, "We'll review it. But if what you're saying holds up, this could put Root Core on the map." I glanced at Arjun, and he just winked, as if to say, "Told you so." That night, when I got home, Seattle was raining again. I opened the window, letting the cold mist touch my face. Then I turned on my laptop and stared at the folder named Wayfinder Labs glowing on my desktop. I remembered Dr. Monroe's words. Money used to be the tool they controlled you with. Turn it into the tool that sets you free. Maybe this was the first step. I didn't need them to validate me anymore. I only needed myself, and a dream written in lines of code beneath Seattle's endless rain. 3 months after that pitch, Wayfinder Labs was officially given the green light. Rootcore approved it as a spin-in startup, with Arjun as CEO and me as CTO and co-founder. The initial funding was modest, just enough to hire 2 engineers and a data specialist, but that didn't matter. I'd once started with nothing but a used laptop and a cup of cold coffee. At least now, I had a team. The first stage was a whirlwind. We built the MVP, the very first working version of Wayfinder. The interface was plain, gray, and unpolished, but the algorithm ran smoother than we'd dared to hope. Arjun and I spent weeks reaching out to potential partners until 5 small delivery businesses around Seattle agreed to become pilot users: a craft coffee shop in Fremont, a bakery in Capitol Hill, 2 independent bookstores, and a flower company. They agreed to share their delivery data in exchange for free access to the software. During those first few weeks, I practically lived at the office. We installed tracking devices, monitored every delivery route through Wayfinder's dashboard, and logged every number by hand. There were nights when I fell asleep on the keyboard, my brain still running 2 lines of logic at once. Arjun would bring me black coffee, joking, "If you pass out here, I'll have to rewrite the whole codebase myself." I'd just laugh without looking up. In my head, I could still hear my mother's voice. Computer science isn't practical. I wanted her to hear these numbers now. After a month of pilot testing, the results were beyond anything we'd expected. Idle travel time per delivery route dropped by 28%, CO2 emissions decreased by nearly 18%, and fuel costs fell accordingly. The business owners sent us emails filled with gratitude, saying the software had saved them thousands of dollars each month. One of them, the bakery owner, wrote, "Your tool made me believe that technology can have a heart." I must have read that line at least 10 times. Arjun published our first case study on the company blog under the headline, "How Small Businesses Can Go Green Without Going Broke." The post spread faster than we imagined. Within a week, our inbox was flooded with partnership inquiries. A few local tech magazines picked up the story. I was invited to a podcast run by a startup community in the Pacific Northwest. When the host asked, "What inspired you to create Wayfinder?" I simply said, "Being underestimated is the most powerful kind of fuel. It teaches you how to burn until you shine." The following month, we met with an angel investor group in Portland. They offered a small Series A deal, just enough to grow our team, build our own server infrastructure, and expand beyond Seattle. Arjun looked at me, half joking, half serious. "You're officially a CTO now. Don't forget we started with 2 laptops and a credit card." I smiled and pulled out the old green bus pass from my wallet, the same one I'd received on my 18th birthday. I'd kept it as a charm, a reminder that every big journey starts with a trip no one believes in. For the signing, I bought a simple gray suit, not to prove anything, but because I wanted to see, in my own reflection, a woman who had chosen her seat at the table. The signing itself was brief. When Arjun and I walked out of the conference room, he clapped my shoulder and said, "We just changed the wind, Maya. No one can call this a ridiculous idea anymore." I didn't answer. I just looked out the window. Seattle was still raining, and the city lights reflected across the wet streets like thousands of data streams in motion. We started expanding the team. One of the first people Arjun interviewed was Ethan Morales, a data engineer from Portland. I'd met him once before at a NeurIP satellite conference in Seattle. I was chatting with a small group about using deep learning to predict route fluctuations when he walked up, holding a cup of coffee. "You're Maya Collins, right? I read the piece about Wayfinder on Tech Northwest," he said. "Impressive work." He didn't say it the way people do when they're trying to flatter you. It sounded genuine, like acknowledgement, not praise. We talked through the entire break about emission prediction algorithms, about building carbon-free cities, and eventually about Mexican food and the kind of rain that never really stops in the Pacific Northwest. A week later, Arjun called me into his office. "We need another lead for the data team. I want you to meet Morales. I think you'll like him." When Ethan walked in, he wore that same calm smile from the conference. He presented a few ideas about expanding the prediction model using satellite weather data. When I asked him why he chose Wayfinder over the big tech firms trying to recruit him, he just said, "Because what you're building actually matters. I want to be part of something I'll be proud to talk about." I didn't respond right away, but something inside me softened. It had been so long since anyone had used the word proud without attaching a condition to it. In my family, pride was always conditional: if you do things right, if you act more like Lila. But here, in this small office washed in pale blue light, this man said it simply, quietly, as if it had always been true. Ethan was hired. In the days that followed, we worked side by side in the tech room. He was the quiet type, but whenever I got stuck on a model, he'd appear with a hot cup of coffee and a few short suggestions. "Try reducing the carbon offset weight," or "That data stream might be noisy from the rain, I'll filter it." Gradually, our collaboration became as natural as breathing. When Wayfinder landed its first major contract with a regional delivery chain, we celebrated with pizza and old indie music. Arjun raised his glass. "This is our anchor product, the thing that keeps Wayfinder on the map." Dow. I looked around the cramped room where everyone was laughing, and it hit me. This was the first time in my life I truly felt like I belonged somewhere. That night, after everyone had gone home, Ethan and I stayed behind. Outside, the rain fell softly, the city lights glimmering on the surface of Lake Union. He said quietly, "You know, I think you've already won." I smiled, half curious, half teasing. "Won what exactly?" He met my eyes, his brown gaze warm like the glow of a desk lamp. "You've beaten the words they once threw at you." I didn't answer. I just looked out the window. For the first time, Seattle's rain didn't feel sad anymore. It sounded like the soundtrack to a brand new chapter of my life. 3 years after that day, Arjun pulled me into a tiny meeting room in South Lake Union. Wayfinder Labs was no longer a fledgling startup. We had our own office overlooking Lake Union, a full team of engineers, data scientists, marketers, and more than 20 corporate clients spread across the Pacific Northwest. Our annual recurring revenue ARR had surpassed every early investor projection. The numbers glowing on the dashboard were no longer aspirations, they were proof. Wayfinder was real. When we signed our first multi-city expansion deal stretching from Seattle to Portland, San Diego, and Austin, Arjun leaned back in his chair, laughing in disbelief. "We really made it this far, huh, Maya?" I just smiled. "We're only getting started." But deep down, I knew this was a turning point. After years of running from the feeling of being unworthy, I was finally standing inside something. I had built something born from my own hands, and all the nights I'd stayed awake chasing it. I was no longer the shy developer tucked in a corner. I was the one literally leading the way. Hundreds of delivery routes now moved smoother, cleaner, greener each day because of what we'd built. And for the first time in my life, I could breathe without feeling guilty for doing things my way. That April, I signed the papers for a house in Medina, a quiet neighborhood along Lake Washington, just a few miles from downtown Seattle but a world apart in calm. The house cost $5.2 million. It wasn't a mansion, just a minimalist blend of glass and wood, open and modern, facing the still blue water. My home office measured about 20 by 25 feet, half covered in whiteboards and bookshelves, the other half glass panels overlooking the lake. I asked the architect to leave the exposed steel beams intact. I liked the reminder that everything beautiful begins with something raw. When I got the keys, Arjun teased, "Nice place, Maya. But remember, it's not software, don't try to optimize it." I laughed. "Don't worry. All I need is a stable Wi-Fi connection and walls thick enough not to hear the rain." He shook his head. "Seattle without the sound of rain isn't Seattle." Maybe he was right, but I'd heard the rain for too many years. I needed a space where every sound was one I chose. When I moved in, I kept my old habits, minimal, intentional. The living room had a gray sofa, a simple oak table, and a few abstract paintings I'd picked up from local art markets. The kitchen was spacious and bright, though I rarely cooked. On weekends, I jogged around Cary Park, stopping to watch the city fade under its veil of mist. And every single time, I thought, who would have guessed that the girl who once got a bus pass instead of a car would be running through the very streets she used to walk? I still went to the office like always, still bought my coffee from the same corner cafe, still did my grocery shopping at the humble market near Capitol Hill. Those habits, I couldn't let them go. Or maybe I didn't want to. One time, the cashier asked, "So, where do you work? I see you here every week." I smiled. "Just in the city. I like stores that still feel real." I didn't say I was the CTO of a startup being featured in magazines because I didn't need to. I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. I still saw Dr. Tessa Monroe once a month, though our sessions were shorter now. At my last visit, she looked at me with a small, knowing smile, her eyes glinting with quiet pride. "It seems you've found peace," she said. I hesitated for a moment before replying, "Maybe. But sometimes, I feel like I'm living inside someone else's dream, a dream about success, about making it. And I'm afraid that if I ever stop trying, it'll all disappear." Dr. Monroe rested her chin on her hand. "That's the survivor's syndrome of someone who's been invalidated," she said softly. "You grew used to proving your worth over and over again. But remember this, you don't need to deserve this house or this career. They aren't your identity. They're simply tools, tools for your freedom. Law. Her words stayed with me the rest of the afternoon. When I got home, I went into my office and looked out at Lake Washington, its surface turning silver beneath the sunset. I placed the old green bus pass inside a glass frame and set it in the center of my desk, not as a relic, but as a reminder. Every journey begins by knowing exactly where you're standing. That evening, Ethan came over. He brought a paper bag from our favorite Mexican restaurant, the one with my favorite enchiladas. He walked slowly through the house, taking it in, and said quietly, "You know, this place feels a lot like you, calm, deliberate, and everything's exactly where it should be." I laughed. "You sound like you're reviewing a product." He shrugged, smiling. "I'm just being honest." Then he turned toward me, his brown eyes warm and steady. "I'm proud of you, Maya." It was a sentence I'd never heard from my parents, but from him, it carried no weight, no condition. It was light, effortless, like a breeze gliding across the lake. And I realized then some words don't need to come from the ones who hurt us. They only need to come from someone who truly sees us for who we are. That summer, Seattle was unusually sunny. Lake Washington gleamed like a mirror, reflecting the row of houses along the Medina shore where I'd grown used to waking each morning to the soft sound of waves and the low hum of the washing machine in the basement. My life seemed to have settled into a rhythm of quiet stability, steady work, a gentle love, a home full of light. Until one Saturday afternoon, a ripple from the past broke the surface carrying a voice I thought I'd never have to hear again. Lila had come back from Paris. I didn't find out from a call, but through a photo that appeared by chance on Instagram. In it, she stood outside a cafe in Queen Anne, smiling over a latte, the caption reading, "Finally back home." Heck. I stared at that line for a long time. Home. The word felt strange coming from someone who had spent 2 years in a chic Le Marais apartment, posting croissants, wine glasses, and art galas as her subtle bragging rights. But between the lines of that caption, I could sense something uneasy, something that didn't quite fit in her perfect return. People who still kept in touch with my parents said Paris hadn't been as sweet as the pictures made it look. Lila hadn't found stable work, the costs were high, the contracts temporary, and the savings my parents had been sending her were slowly drying up. I didn't feel joy, and I didn't feel revenge either. What I felt was stranger, a detached kind of irony. Life, it seemed, had come full circle. They still believed they'd invested wisely, and I was still the one who had to figure things out on my own. Only this time, our places had completely reversed. That Saturday afternoon was quiet. I was home with Ethan. We were about to drive out to the farmer's market in Bellevue. When I opened the gate, sunlight hit the white stone pathway and reflected off the brass nameplate by the door. M. Collins. I didn't sense anything unusual until my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. I wasn't going to answer, but something in me, an instinct, maybe said I should. I slid my thumb across the screen. The moment I did, a trembling, tear-choked voice burst through. "Maya, is that you?" "It's me, Lila. I just drove past Medina. Do you actually live here?" I was silent for a few seconds. "What are you trying to ask, Lila?" On the other end, I heard her breathing quicken, then crack. "That house, your name's on the gate. It says your name. Is it you? Why does she have that? Why do you have that?" I hung up before the tears could fall. Not out of anger, but because in her voice, I heard the echo of all those years when she had everything, and I had to ask permission just to exist. Ethan glanced over, brow furrowed. "You okay?" I nodded, though inside, an old tide had started to rise. Within an hour, my phone was overflowing with missed calls and messages. My mother, my father, my aunt. Even my grandmother, the people who'd vanished from my life had suddenly reappeared, as if they'd just rediscovered a lost planet. Their voicemails swung wildly between shock, curiosity, and indignation. My mother's voice came first, shrill, dramatic, polished as ever. "Maya Marie, I just spoke with your sister. Do you have a house in Medina? You need to call me immediately. Your sister's been crying all morning. She doesn't understand what's going on. I didn't respond. But the next day, there were 10 more calls. Then came my father, the man who once told me investment must bring returns. His voice was lower, calmer, rehearsed. Maya, it's Dad. Your mother's worried. Call us back. We need to talk, as a family. I laughed out loud. Family. A word they only ever used when there was something they wanted. By day 5, the drizzle of calls had turned into a storm. Distant relatives messaged their congratulations laced with curiosity. Heard you're in tech, so impressive. Which part of Medina are you in? Near Bill Gates, maybe? Your parents must be so proud. Ayman? I read them all, then deleted them. No one asked what it had taken for me to get here, only why I had it. That Friday afternoon, a courier dropped off a thick envelope, handwritten. I knew the handwriting instantly. It was my mother's. I stood in the foyer, rain hammering the glass roof above me, and opened it. The first line was written in the carefully measured tone she used on holidays. Maya, I'm not writing to argue. We've been apart too long, and perhaps it's time to heal. Lila is pregnant, you're going to be an aunt. I hope this news will make you think differently. I kept reading. Your father's planning to replace the roof, but it's expensive, and work hasn't been great lately. You know, family is where we lean on each other in hard times. I'm happy for your success, truly. But I also hope you remember that success is meant to be shared. Whatever happened in the past, blood is still blood. I trust you're not a cold-hearted person. Lay. I set the letter down on the table and felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me, cold and sharp like the wind that rolled off the lake. They hadn't come back out of love, they'd come back because they believed I could now pay the price for their own mistakes. In my family, affection had always come with an invoice. I didn't cry, and I didn't get angry. I just felt empty. I picked up a pen and wrote a single line in the therapy journal Dr. Tessa had once told me to keep. They don't miss me. They miss the role they could assign to me. I closed the notebook, switched off my phone, and stepped out onto the porch. Outside, Lake Washington rippled faintly under the dim light. I took a deep breath and let the chill run through my hair. Out here, everything was still, everything except memory. That night, Ethan found me standing alone in my office. He walked over and asked softly, "They reached out again?" I nodded. "Yeah, now they need me." Well. He was quiet for a while, then said in that low, steady voice of his, "They need you not because they love you, but because they don't realize you've already learned how to live without them." I turned toward him and smiled. Outside, the first autumn rain began to fall over Medina, not the rain of running away anymore, but the rain of closure. I didn't go online. I didn't post angry captions or photos of my house or my company contracts as proof. I just sat in my office, watching the soft waves shift beneath the fading afternoon light, and decided to write 2 letters, not out of revenge, but to draw the final line. The first letter was for my mother. I opened my laptop, typed Elaine Collins into the address bar, then paused. The last time I had called her mom was 4 years ago, right before she said, "You don't deserve any help." I took a deep breath and began to type. "Mom, I read your letter. I believe you think you're reaching out to mend things, but what you call healing is really just a return to the old pattern, the one where I carry the emotional and financial weight of everyone else's choices. I can't go back there. I'm not writing to blame you. I just want you to understand why I left. Below are 5 things you and Dad did, things that weren't misunderstandings, but repeated patterns that shaped my entire childhood. 1. When I was 16, Lila was given a car. I was given a bus pass and a lecture about responsibility. 2. When I got a scholarship, you said, "That's nice, but don't forget to help your sister get ready for prom." 3. When I graduated, you and Dad showed up late and left early because Lila had a hair appointment. 4. When I asked to borrow a small amount for tuition, you said, "Stop thinking you're entitled to help." 5. And finally, when you declared you don't deserve any help while signing an $80,000 check for Lila to study in Paris. These are the memories I can't erase, even though I've learned not to let them define me. From now on, if you wish to contact me, I can only agree under 3 conditions. 1. No mention of money, no requests, no hints, no implications. 2. Do not show up at my home unannounced. 3. Do not use the phrase, daughter's duty, to make me feel guilty. If you can respect these 3 conditions, I'll listen. If not, I'll keep my distance. I'm not writing this letter to punish you, but to protect the small peace it's taken me years to build. Maya. I reread the letter 3 times before printing it, signing my name, and mailing it by certified post. I didn't expect an apology. All I wanted was silence. The second letter was for my father, David Collins. With him, I chose a different tone, measured, but sharp. Dad. I know you think all of this is a misunderstanding, that Mom is just hot-tempered and things were blown out of proportion. But you forget I grew up inside the equations you called investment and return. To you, love was an expense that needed visible profit. But Dad, I'm not a stock, and I don't owe anyone a percentage. I paid off my student loans $43,000 with my own salary. I built a career without anyone's investment. You once said investing in Lila was about securing the family's future. So where is that future now? Meanwhile, the one you labeled a risk, the liability, became the only one who produced a real return. Freedom, peace, and self-respect. I'm inviting you to meet me once, at the cafe in Fremont, the one by the old steel bridge over the river. Not to argue, but to close what's been left open. If you agree, I'll be there this Thursday at 10 a.m. 3 days later, he replied. Just one line. I'll come. The Fremont Cafe was cold and quiet that morning. Light filtered through the wide glass windows and scattered across the wooden tables. I arrived early, chose a corner seat, and ordered a black coffee. When my father walked in, he looked almost unchanged: brown coat, upright posture, a faint trace of uncertainty on his face. Maybe it was the first time he'd ever met me not as the daughter who needed teaching, but as an adult who no longer required permission to exist. You look different, he said, setting his hat down on the table. Better or worse? I asked. He gave a small, uneasy laugh. Different is fine. Your mother might have gone too far. You know how she is always worrying about Lila. Mothers can let their emotions get ahead of their reason sometimes. I looked at him calmly. You know, I've heard that my whole life your mother means well. Your mother didn't intend harm. But if someone stabs you with a knife, you don't say, it's okay, they didn't mean it. A wound is still a wound. He was silent for a moment, turning his coffee cup slowly between his palms. I just want things to be peaceful. We're still family. End of 60. Family can't be peaceful if one side has to suffer for the other to stay comfortable, I said evenly. He looked up, a flicker of pride or maybe hurt in his eyes. Do you really think your mother and I did nothing for you? We raised you, fed you, sent you to school. I cut him off, my voice steady. Dad, I'm grateful for that. But I also know exactly what happened after I turned 18. The tuition loans, the rent, the meals, I earned them all myself. The only return I owe is to myself, to live a life no one else gets to control. The air went still. From the window, the light caught the gray in his hair, outlining every strand. For the first time, I saw fatigue cross his face, a kind of quiet surrender. He said softly, your mother only wanted Lila to have that picture in Paris so we could save face with the relatives. She was afraid of being compared, afraid people would say we couldn't afford to send our daughter abroad. That 80,000. It wasn't really for Lila, it was for appearances. I sat there, silent. And suddenly, every missing piece fell into place. Every word, every choice, they all made sense now. They hadn't just played favorites, they'd turned love into a public performance. I looked out the window at the slow-moving river and said quietly, pride is what people cling to when they've already lost their self-respect. I can't keep living in that equation anymore. I've won. He looked like he wanted to say something, but I raised my hand gently to stop him. I don't blame you, Dad. Honestly, I don't. I just want closure. I forgive you, but not so we can go back to the old dynamic. Forgiveness, for me, isn't about reopening the game of power, it's about freeing myself from it. He stared at me for a long time, his gaze slightly unfocused, then nodded. Maybe you're right. I stood up and placed a few bills on the table. You don't owe me anything, Dad. And I don't owe you or Mom anything either. That's the only kind of fairness I can live with. When I stepped outside, the Fremont wind sliced through my coat, cold but oddly cleansing. The river shimmered under the gray sky just like that morning years ago when I left home with nothing but a suitcase and $200 in my pocket. Now, I carried no suitcase, only what I had once lacked most, peace. On my way home, I pulled over by the bridge and looked down at the water. Rain began to fall, each drop breaking the surface, washing away the last of the echoes. I smiled to myself and thought, some wounds don't need someone else to heal them. They only need us to stop touching them. For the first time in years, I felt truly at peace. A week after meeting my father, I crossed paths with my mother and Lila. That night, Seattle's sky was painted a soft, pale blue, reflecting off the lake lights around Union. I walked into the Museum of History and Industry, where the city's annual gala was underway, a major fundraiser for education and community development. Wayfinder Labs was the primary sponsor for the evening's green transport system. Every shuttle was electric, and every route optimized by the very algorithm my team had built. For me, it wasn't just a glamorous event, it was proof that the path I'd chosen had created real value, the kind that couldn't be measured by anyone's approval. The grand hall glowed in gold light. The glass walls shimmered with reflections of guests in elegant evening wear. I shook hands with entrepreneurs, researchers, and city leaders, some of whom had nodded along to my presentation at last year's Sustainability Summit. Ethan stood beside me, quietly proud, squeezing my hand before we split off to mingle. When the event host introduced Wayfinder as a pioneering force in sustainable urban logistics, I simply bowed my head. I didn't need the spotlight. I'd spent a lifetime living in someone else's shadow. Now, I just wanted to stand steady in my own light. I was speaking with a small group from the Northwest Tech for Good Foundation when a voice sweet, high, and perfectly trained to carry across a crowd cut through the music behind me. Maya, there you are. I turned around. Elaine. Walking beside her was Lila, in a pale blue lace dress, her stomach slightly rounded, pregnant, for real. For a moment, I said nothing. I simply watched my mother orchestrate the scene, her smile tight and deliberate, one hand subtly pushing Leela forward like she was presenting a prop. "We came to congratulate you, darling," she said brightly. "Your father couldn't make it, but we wanted to be part of the celebration. You've done so many wonderful things." She paused just long enough for attention to turn toward us, then shifted her tone, soft but commanding. "But no matter how successful you become, you'll always be part of this family. Now, let's see you do something for the family, hmm? Lila's preparing for the baby, and your father still needs to fix the roof. A little support would show everyone you haven't forgotten where you came from." The glances around the table drifted toward me, curious, waiting. She knew exactly what she was doing. We were standing in a gala hall, under chandeliers and polished smiles, surrounded by donors and city officials. If I refused, she'd make sure I looked cold, ungrateful, unfilial. I could hear my own heartbeat, steady as a drum, but I didn't feel anger. Anger was what she expected. Instead, I smiled. "You're right, Mom," I said calmly, my voice low but clear enough to quiet the nearby tables. "I have received a lot, and I do want to give back, just in my own way." I blinked. I gestured subtly to one of the event staff nearby, who stepped forward with the pearl-colored envelope I'd prepared earlier. The host had just finished announcing the final donation segment of the night, a new scholarship fund for underprivileged young women in STEM. I walked toward the stage. It wasn't planned, but no one stopped me. Everyone knew Wayfinder was one of the event's major sponsors. I took the microphone. My voice carried easily, calm and grounded. Tonight, I'd like to make a personal contribution, an $80,000 donation to the City Science Scholarship Fund for every girl who was ever told she doesn't deserve help." A ripple of quiet spread across the hall. Then I continued. "I know what that feels like. And I believe that when opportunity is given to the right hands, it can change an entire life. I'd like to call this an investment." End of town. I turned slightly toward the table where Elaine and Lila sat, surrounded by their polished circle of friends. The spotlight caught the large white check now being displayed on stage, my signature beneath the line that read, "To the girls once told they don't deserve help." 2 seconds of absolute silence, then applause erupted, soft at first, then rolling through the hall like a wave. People stood, clapping, cheering. Someone even called out, "Bravo." End of. I bowed my head slightly in thanks, but my eyes stayed on my mother. Elaine's smile faltered, freezing into something brittle and pale. She tried to recover, glancing toward acquaintances for reassurance, but the cracks showed. Lila's head was down, her hand resting protectively on her belly, as if to shield herself from the moment. I stepped down from the stage and walked directly toward their table. I leaned close enough for only them to hear, but my voice was steady and clear. "You used to call it an investment," I said softly. "So do I. The only difference is I invested in the right people." Elaine didn't speak. She just stared, her painted expression collapsing into silence. At the doorway, I caught sight of David, my father, arriving late, his eyes flickering toward the stage where the $80,000 check still glowed under the light. His gaze dropped, heavy with recognition. He knew exactly what that number meant, how it had once been spent to protect their image. And now, that same number stood as proof of a truth none of them could ever erase. As I turned away, the applause still hadn't faded. A few people came up to shake my hand, telling me they were moved by the message turning pain into purpose. I smiled, thanked them, and slipped toward the far side of the room, where Ethan was waiting. His eyes glowed with that quiet, proud warmth. "You just rewrote the definition of justice," he whispered. I shook my head gently. "No," I said. "I just gave it back its real meaning." Across the room, I could still see my mother standing in the crowd. Her face, illuminated under the golden lights, looked small and unsure, like someone caught between hiding and facing herself. I didn't feel triumphant. Deep down, all I felt was release. The final chapter had closed itself with grace, not rage. When the night ended, I stepped outside the museum. Seattle rain had begun to fall again, the lights reflecting across the slick pavement like fading trails of memory. I tilted my head up, took a long breath, and listened to the wind sweeping across the glass canopy, the same sound I'd grown up hearing, but now it no longer echoed as a reminder of sorrow. It sounded like freedom. Ethan wrapped his arm around my shoulder. "How does it feel?" he asked softly. I looked out toward the mist over Lake Union. "Like I've finally gotten a return on life," I said. "Except this time, the profit isn't money, it's peace." After the gala, Seattle returned to its usual rhythm, soft rain, fog curling over the lake, and my voicemail utterly silent. No more calls, no messages, no, "We need to talk." I hadn't blocked them. I'd simply let silence draw the boundary. And this silence wasn't heavy, it was clear, like the stillness between two musical notes. Everything had finally settled where it belonged. By June, Ethan and I hosted a small engagement gathering by the Medina lakeshore. Just a handful of close friends, Zoe, the one who used to bring me hot dinners during my all-nighters, Arjun, now more like an older brother than a colleague, and Dr. Tessa, standing quietly at the back of the garden, smiling with a kind of pride that said everything. There was no stage, no loud music. Just a late summer afternoon, the sun melting over the water, and the wind threading through the maple trees. When it was time for toasts, Arjun stepped forward, holding the microphone and grinning. "I met Maya when she was still figuring out how to make delivery routes less congested," he said. "But she ended up teaching me something else entirely, that before you can reduce carbon emissions, you first have to learn how to reduce the fires inside your own heart." Laughter rippled through the guests, followed by a moment of perfect quiet. I glanced around and saw Zoe wiping her eyes, and Ethan squeezed my hand gently. "You did it," he whispered. That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat alone in my office. The warm light pooled across a blank sheet of paper. I opened my journal and began the last letter, the one I would never send. "I no longer need you to see me. I am the one who sees myself now. I have walked through a childhood full of empty spaces, through nights believing I had to be better to be loved. Now I understand real love never needs proof. And I have learned how to love myself." I closed the notebook and placed it in the drawer. Outside the window, the Medina night was still, the moon laying a glassy trail across the lake. I knew that by morning, a new chapter would begin, not one of striving, but of peace. At dawn, I stood in my home office, the very space that once existed only in the imagination of a girl who lived off ramen and graveyard shifts. Sunlight spilled over the shelves and whiteboard, warming the unfinished equations scrawled across it. I opened the drawer and took out my old bus pass, the small plastic card that had once symbolized humiliation, that painful lesson in responsibility. I placed it gently inside a glass frame on the wall. Beneath it, a small metal plaque read, "Broken routes, better paths." I stepped back, watching the sunrise glint off the frame. In that moment, I saw her, the girl with tangled hair and a frayed backpack, waiting for the first bus ride of her life. I smiled at her, a full, unbitter smile. "They once told me I didn't deserve their help," I whispered. "They were right. I never deserved conditional love. I deserved better, and I finally gave it to myself."